Hey guys, Mitch from Shock Therapy. Today we're going to be showing you how to install the rear frame support kit for the Polaris Pro XP. We're very excited to be releasing new products for the Pro XP. Through tons of testing and observation on this car, we've actually seen the frame crack where the sway bar mounts. This frame support goes in that exact area and triangulates and strengthens the frame to help prevent any of the future damages that can occur. This frame support kit is a complete bolt-on kit and is made from some of the strongest materials you can get. Once it's installed, you don't ever have to worry about it again. This install is a little bit more in depth, so give yourself 2 to 3 hours to install. Let's jump on in. I'm going to show you guys how to do it. The first step in the installation is to remove the rear seats. This is going to vary from whether it being factory seats or aftermarket seats. With the seat removed, you can now remove the factory firewall. With the factory firewall removed, you can now remove the sway bar hardware holding the sway bar to the frame. Make sure that you save this hardware for later in the installation. Next, remove the sway bar link from the sway bar. With the sway bar link removed, you can now remove the back half of the factory skid plate. This will give you access to the bottom lower motor mount bolts. Using a 13mm socket, remove the nuts holding the bolts that hold the motor mount to the frame. Remove the bolts from the motor mount from the bottom side of the frame. Next, jack up the motor mount just enough so you can remove the factory motor mount. Using a 15mm socket, remove the motor mount bushing from the motor mount. Next, remove the bolt that is holding the heat shield to the tab on the frame. With the heat shield out of the way, you can now install the frame support into its location. With the frame support loosely fitted, you can now reinstall the motor mount bushing and reinstall the 15mm bolt. Being careful to not strip out the bolt when aligning it to the motor mount. Snug up the motor mount and reinstall the bolts that lower the motor mount just enough to where the motor mount bushing sits flush onto the frame. Reinstall the nuts on the bottom side of the motor mount, making sure that you leave these loose at this time. Reinstall the factory hardware through the frame support, through the frame, and then through the sway bar clamp. Install the bolts onto the factory sway bar hardware and begin tightening down. With the sway bar hardware tightened, you can now tighten down the lower motor mount hardware. Next, tighten down the 15mm bolt holding the motor mount bushing to the motor mount. Reconnect the sway bar link, making sure that you tighten it down. With the sway bar link installed, you can now reinstall the heat shield with the 10mm bolt holding it to the tab on the frame. With the passenger side complete, you can now begin starting on the driver's side. Remove the factory hardware holding the sway bar to the frame mount. Save this hardware for later in the installation. Remove the lower hardware holding the motor mount bushing to the frame. Remove the bolts from the motor mount bushing and save these for later. Next, jack up the motor mount. Okay. Disconnect the sway bar link from the sway bar and remove the factory motor mount bushing. Install the frame support loosely and begin reinstalling the factory motor mount bushing. Make sure that you line up the bolt that holds the motor mount bushing to the motor mount. Reinstall the 2 bolts that hold the motor mount bushing to the frame. With the bolts installed, you can now slowly lower the motor mount back into its location. Reinstall the nuts on the bottom side, leaving them loose at this time. Next, reinstall the factory SWAYBAR hardware through the frame support, through the frame, and then through the SWAYBAR clamp. With both bolts installed, you can now begin tightening down these hardware. With the SWAYBAR hardware tightened, you can now tighten down the motor mount hardware holding the motor mount bushing to the frame. Next, tighten down the motor mount bushing to the motor mount and reinstall the SWAYBAR link to the SWAYBAR. With both frame supports installed, you can now reinstall the skid plate. Next, reinstall both upper and lower firewall pieces. Next, reinstall the rear seats, followed by the seat belts, and your installation is complete. We hope that this video helped you guys with the installation of the rear frame supports at home. As with any install that we do recommend that you guys check the hardware after the installation or a couple 100 miles to make sure that it is still tight. The great thing about the frame supports is once they're installed, they are set and done and you don't have to worry about them again. These frame support kits are made right here in the USA and they are online if you'd like to check them out at www.shocktherapyusa.com. If you guys have any technical questions or any questions about products that we offer, feel free to reach out at 623-217-4959. If you guys like this video, make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit the bell to be notified anytime that we post a new video.